and good afternoon on this beautiful day. It's an honor to welcome you all to Southgate Progressive Synagogue for our 6th annual Rabbi Harry Martin Jacobi Memorial Lecture, a cornerstone of our community's life, and a time to gather in memory, in learning, and in love. A special welcome to our distinguished guests today, Councillor Margaret Greer, Deputy Mayor of Enfield, and Councillor Negus Naranthira, past Mayor of Barnet, and our MP, Bambos, Charalambos. We are extremely grateful for your presence and for joining us on this day. And of course to Rabbi Jacobi's children, Rabbi Richard Jacobi and Rabbi Margaret Jacobi, we are so glad to have you with us as we remember your remarkable father. And of course, at this time, we think of your brother who sadly is not with us in person, your brother David. Welcome also to our speaker and president of Liberal Judaism, Rabbi Andrew, former president of Liberal Judaism, Rabbi Andrew Goldstein and Sharon, his wife. Welcome to, is Karen here? Karen Newman? Thank you. Karen, the chairperson of Liberal Judaism. Welcome to Rabbi Josh Levy, CEO of Reform Judaism. Thank you very much for joining us. And of course, most importantly, welcome to each and every one of you for being here, and especially to Father Ed Turner from St. Andrew's Church and Duncan Brisk, Associate Pastor at Emmanuel Church. Friends, yesterday in synagogue, we began a new book of Torah, Vayikra, or in English, Leviticus, a book that begins with a whisper, Vayikra el Moshe, and God called to Moses, a quiet voice from the heart of the Mishkan, the sacred sanctuary, whispered intimations of the divine presence, and a voice, I think, that calls to each one of us. Vayikra speaks of offerings and of sacrifices, in Hebrew the word korbanot, rituals that to us progressive modern Jews might seem ancient and obscure. Yet at their core, these sacrifices, these offerings, are about drawing near. The word korban in Hebrew comes from the root karov, kuf reish bet, which means being close, coming close. They're about repairing, reconnecting, and returning. And as we prepare for Pesach next Saturday evening, the festival of freedom, we're reminded that liberation doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with small sacred acts that draw people close. And this is what Rabbi Harry Jacobi did with his life. Rabbi Jacobi escaped Nazi Europe and came to Britain not just to survive, but to thrive and to serve. He went on to become one of the great leaders of British liberal Judaism and a beloved rabbi of this very community, a formative figure in the founding and the development of liberal Judaism in both the UK and Europe. So much of his life was a sacred offering of presence, of justice, of compassion, and of hope. He gave his heart to making others feel welcome. He gave his time to nurture young leaders. He gave his life to the cause of liberation through love. What better legacy to carry us into Pesach, into Passover? And so, friends, as we begin to prepare our homes for Pesach, may we also prepare our hearts. And may today's lecture be an offering in itself, a moment of learning, of study that brings us closer to one another, to our values, and to the sacred memory and legacy of Rabbi Jacobi, Zichrono Livracha. May his memory be for a blessing. Thank you, and welcome to Southgate Progressive Synagogue.
This microphone working too? Thank you, Danny, for those beautiful words. I should also add that the present president of Liberal Judaism, Rabbi Alex Wright, has sent her apologies for today due to congregational commitments, otherwise she would have liked to be here too. And now I'd like to offer prayer as we start this event. Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, our God and God of our ancestors, we come together in memory of Rabbi Harry Jacobi at a time of anxiety, fear and division when the world feels dark. May the words we hear today bring us hope. May we gain strength from our coming together and inspiration from the example of those who came before us, who lived through times darker than we can imagine and remained steadfast and courageous. May we always be thankful for the blessings we have and the opportunities we have to learn from each other and to spar and strengthen each other. Be with us today and always, and help us. As we approach the festival of Pesach, Passover, which links the generations one to another, may we feel the influence of previous generations and play our part in building the world that they hoped and worked for. Amen.
I am delighted to introduce Rabbi Dr. Andrew Goldstein this afternoon. Andrew is one of the most senior rabbis in the liberal movement, and his impact and influence extends across almost all aspects of progressive Jewish life. As I will briefly explain, and I apologize, Andrew, that this introduction will necessarily be incomplete. As a student rabbi, Andrew served the fledgling Pinner and District Liberal Synagogue, and then upon ordination by Leibek College in 1970, he became the rabbi of the renamed Northwood and Pinner Liberal Synagogue. This grew massively under his leadership, becoming the second largest liberal synagogue before he retired in 2008, handing over to his son Aaron. His congregational ministry has been exemplary. From his student rabbinic days, he ran, initially in tandem with Douglas Charing, confirmation weekends for teenage students, which contributed to the birth of Alpsnik, the ULPS network of youth clubs, the youth movement of the liberal movement that Margaret, David, Zichrono Livracha, and I all benefited from and went on to play leadership roles in. He and Sharon together founded and for a long time were synonymous with Kadima Summer School, which embedded liberal Jewish identity in generations of young Jews, and which also became a training ground for future rabbis and leaders. In this area, Andrew also showed how to hand over the reins at the right time, which he did to Rabbi Danny Rich, whom I believe some of you might know. In 1978, prompted by the Torah scrolls that NPLS has from the Memorial Scrolls Trust, Andrew preached about the Czech and Slovak Jewish communities then still under communist rule. This led to an ongoing personal and communal engagement with the Jews of that region that helped liberal Judaism develop in these countries. Andrew acted as a consultant rabbi to congregations in Prague, in Brno, and in Bratislava, among others. Linked to this, he chaired the European Union for Progressive Judaism and is still, I believe, a vice president of the EUPJ. If that weren't enough, Andrew, we could say Dayenu, but we won't, we'll save that for next week. Andrew chaired the editorial committee of Sidur Lev Hadash. He co-edited Machzor Ruach Hadashah with Rabbi Dr. Charles Middleborough, and topically, he co-edited with Rabbi Pete Tobias the current liberal Haggadah. His influence is still being felt through these three publications, among others. While Emeritus Rabbi of NPLS, now the Ark Synagogue, Andrew also chaired the liberal Beit Din with great compassion and clarity, and he has also, as we heard just now, served the movement as its president. Finally, it would be remiss in this introduction not to highlight Sharon, Andrew's wife and partner in so much of what he has done. I should also mention that through Sharon, there is a strong link between our speaker this afternoon and this synagogue. Its life president back in the 1960s, Baron Harris and his wife, and the hall just outside is the Baron Harris room, were Sharon's grandparents. While he was still serving, my father officiated the wedding of Sharon and Andrew. For all these reasons, it is a tremendous pleasure and honor to invite Rabbi Dr. Andrew Goldstein to give the 6th Rabbi Harry Martin Jacobi Memorial Lecture on the very timely topic of finding hope for the future.
Most people have to die before they hear a summary of their life like that, but then they don't hear it. But so maybe I've heard it now, and there we go. And I was going to actually start by saying, first of all, it's an honor to be giving this lecture. It's also very special for Sharon and I to be here because, as you said, even when I was a student, we come here regularly because the president of the synagogue at that time was Sharon's grandfather, and we come here regularly for Shabbos. And then Harry married us, so it's a very close relationship, and we've been sort of close to the family ever since. And it was, in fact, Harry sort of taught me how to be the chair of the Beit Din and all sorts of things that I learned from him. I would like to weave themes running through the life of Rabbi Harry Jacobi, MBE, into the life and opinions of the prophet Jeremiah ben Hilkiah, pessimism and optimism, despair and hope. How relevant, as has already been mentioned, we hear the daily news, the world seems to be turning on its head at this very moment. Let's start with the prophet Jeremiah, often labeled the prophet of doom, but I consider him the prophet of hope. The Oxford English Dictionary defines the noun Jeremiah as a person who complains continually or foretells disaster. This could be a fair description of the Hebrew prophet, but it doesn't tell the whole story of the man and his life and his prophecies. Jeremiah ben Hilkiah is my favorite prophet. And when I was first introduced to him at Leobeck College over 55 years ago, my understanding of his book helped to develop my devotion to the Bible and helped to clarify my belief in God. The prophet Amos I love for his simple, almost humorous poetry. Isaiah with his majestic pronouncements, Isaiah with his tortured relationships, all merit admiration. But Jeremiah you can get to know and sympathize with and admire. You even get passages in his book that tell us how the Bible came to be, but that's another story. None of the prophets had an easy life. Their basic message and purpose was to reprimand the people, the rulers, the judges, and the priests, and to give warning that current affairs and actions could only lead to the destruction of the community and lead to great suffering. It needed courage and maybe a dose of madness to proclaim such a message. Psychologists will probably tell you how your family background might mold your personality and views on life. Jeremiah is unique among the prophets in that we get information about his personal situation and personality, and so we get an insight into his thinking and actions. His book opens with the words of Jeremiah, son of Hilkiah, one of the priests of Anatot in the territory of Benjamin. Seemingly, Hilkiah was the descendant of the high priest Eli, who presided at the shrine in Shiloh in Samuel's time. Later, King Solomon later expelled his descendants from Shiloh and Jerusalem to Anatot, so that his favorite Zadok could become the high priest. And Zadok's line triumphs ever after. So Jeremiah's family, though hereditary priests, were disinherited from the top jobs. And as the Levites had no land and had to live out their lives in the village of Anatot, there they were, stuck in this little village. And what makes it worse is that Anatot used to be able to see directly to Jerusalem. Now the high-rise buildings perhaps make that not so easy. I wonder if a feeling of being hard done by affected the tone of Jeremiah's condemnation of those in authority over there in Jerusalem. Heinz Hirschberg, who became Harry Martin Jacobi, also had to get over early disappointments and distress. Soon after his bar mitzvah, he had to flee again and again and again, an only child but with a close family. Flee on his own from Berlin to Amsterdam to an orphanage in Rotterdam, and on the last ship to leave Holland in May 1940, to Liverpool, and then to a refugee hostel in Manchester, trained to be a car mechanic. A few years later, the British Army took him as a driver all over liberated Europe, or he took them. And then a brief time in Holland with surviving relatives, his parents murdered. Such an unsettling, hard youth and early adulthood could have made him bitter and hard done by. But many of you knew Harry. He wasn't like that. Let's move back to Jeremiah. We first meet Jeremiah sitting in front of an outdoor cooking pot, gazing out at Jerusalem. I picture him. I wonder if he's pondering, would it have been all different if I'd been born into the front-rank priestly family and not into the second division? Always an outsider. But it was there that he got his first inspiration, his first recorded message from God. He notes that the wind blowing the smoke into his eyes is coming from the north. Strange, because in Anatot, the wind normally blows either from the west, the Mediterranean, or the Hamsim from the eastern desert. But the troublesome wind from the north is a confirmation to him of thought already brewing in his mind. The danger is coming to his land from the north, as indeed it was. As Jeremiah recorded it, and I quote, "The Eternal One said to me, from the north disaster will break loose upon the inhabitants of the land, for I am summoning up the kingdoms of the north." And history records that indeed in Jeremiah's lifetime, first the Scythians and then the Babylonians did sweep south, wreaking havoc and final destruction and conquest. Harry was growing up in the years following the end of the Second World War and the Shoah. Jeremiah was living in a century after the northern Hebrew kingdom of Israel had been totally destroyed in 71 BCE by the Assyrians, a century before, but it must have been still very real in the people's memory and conversation and fears. Yet if, as the Bible says, Jeremiah began his mission in the 13th year of King Josiah, that is 627 BCE. He was then living in relatively good times in the remaining southern kingdom of Judah. The king, Josiah, was a good king, a reformer of the religious establishment and the social justice system, and a seeker of peace. It was a time of relative prosperity. Most could just relax and enjoy life. But a prophet, or to use a modern term, a political commentator, will know that it can't last. And Jeremiah saw that danger lurked in the very prosperity and lack of concern for the real state of affairs. It sounds too familiar. And so Jeremiah's mission was set in train, and soon we find him crossing the valley and entering Jerusalem. But before we travel with him, two asides. First, an intriguing thought. Jeremiah feels that God is calling him to be a prophet, but he's reticent and says, "Eternal God, behold, I cannot speak, for I am a child." Jeremiah's reaction and God's response is just like that of Moses at the burning bush. And Jeremiah's ministry lasted 40 years, as did Moses, and there is much parallel in their character and life stories. But meanwhile, back to chapter 1 in Anatot, we get a second everyday experience. Jeremiah is trying to make up his mind whether this really is God calling him, whether his thoughts about the future are really precedent or just fantasy or madness. And he looks aside and he sees an almond tree beginning to blossom. Now, the almond is the first tree in the region to show signs of spring, just as we saw all the way traveling here today. And the Hebrew noun is shaked, but understandably the verb means to be watchful, to be eager. And the verse 12 of chapter 1 says, Ki shoked ani al davar la'asoto. God says that he will surely make what he's telling Jeremiah actually come to pass. Shaked, shoked, a pun and a tree to do the trick in Jeremiah's mind. Pessimism and optimism. If the boiling pot represents the turmoil and visions of disaster brewing in Jeremiah's mind and prophecy, the beauty and welcome sight of the almond blossom, giving spring color after the bleakness of winter, is a hint of the eventual message of Jeremiah. The other side, the positive side, the hopeful side of his nature. After a winter of destruction, there will always come hope that spring brings every year. Harry's call came not with a boiling pot or an almond blossom, but at a conference of the World Union for Progressive Judaism in Amsterdam, and hearing Rabbi Leo Beck speak of the urgent need to rebuild the presence of Judaism in Europe, that inspired Harry. A meeting with the World Union Secretary Lily Montague, she found him a sponsor and soon repatriated Harry, not to England, but to Scotland, and to Aberdeen of all places, where he served as a minister for 3 years. Cold and bleak, I imagine. Yet Harry was inspired and saw his future serving the Jewish people by becoming a rabbi. And again, Miss Lily helped him. And another World Union conference brought him a wife, and Rose became his co-worker in the mission of serving liberal Judaism. Back to Jeremiah. As he goes down across the valley into Jerusalem, and it's a glorious chapter 7, do read it. It's not any old day, because Jeremiah turns out to be a creative and charismatic preacher and orator, and he knew how to choose the time and the place. It may well have been a festival day when he knew the crowds would gather. Jeremiah may have felt a little depressed, as it seems very often from time to time, because the good King Josiah had been killed in battle at the hands of Pharaoh Necho of Egypt, and now his son Jehoiakim was on the throne. Maybe a good time to remind the new king and the people of his message. Anyway, he goes and stands at the very steps of the temple, and once he has a crowd around him, he points this way and that. Heichal Adonai, Heichal Adonai, Heichal Adonai. The temple of the Eternal One, the temple of the Eternal One, the temple of the Lord. And pointing to the various buildings and gates, he moves on to repeat the brave formula already voiced by Amos and Isaiah. He tells the people, you think this very building, God's very house, is proof of God's presence, and therefore God will always protect you from your enemies. He continues, just go up to Shiloh, the Hebrew shrine in the northern nation of Israel. It didn't protect the Israelites from the invading Assyrians. It now lies in ruins. Why should this place be different? Because you are all hypocrites. You worship in this temple of the Lord, swear your loyalty to Adonai. Meanwhile, and he says, in the streets of Jerusalem, children gather sticks and fathers build fires and mothers knead dough to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven. And they pour libations to other gods to vex me, says God. You openly take part in pagan rituals, he said. And he continues, speaking God's word again, that because of their blasphemous, hypocritical disloyalty, God will destroy this very house and land. It was powerful and brave stuff to say in that place on that occasion. Then he continued with even more graphic words, and it's God speaking again, well, through Jeremiah. Add your burnt offerings to your other sacrifices, but you only eat meat. The whole, he called, the whole holy sacrificial system had become just a barbecue. In other words, the temple ritual itself is but a sham. God reminds them, when I freed you from Egypt, I didn't command you to bring sacrifices or burnt offerings, yet I protected you. Not temple ritual. And remember, Jeremiah is voicing these thoughts at the very gates of the temple. Not these complicated rituals that you consider magic. No, this is not what God wants. Instead, and I quote, do my bidding that I may be your God, and you may be my people. And in further chapters, and on other occasions, Jeremiah teases this out and makes it clear. And it is precisely the formula first crafted by the prophet Amos and then repeated by Isaiah. And it must have been a shocking charge in those days. And yet it should mark our own approach to religion to this day. It was one of the groundbreaking ideas, I believe, that Judaism made Judaism unique among the ancient cults and religions. It was taken up by Christianity and Islam and should mold our very 21st century civilization. It was at the very heart of Rabbi Jacobi's message too. Though he was an observant Jew and valued the place of ritual, his lifelong pursuit was social justice, as taught by the prophets of old, a mission at the very core of liberal Judaism. The basic message of the Hebrew prophets that what God really wants is social justice, people behaving ethically in their own lives. Maybe this, it was a challenging thing for him to do, but it led, of course, to loneliness. People attacked him for all of this. It was difficult. Maybe this prompted him to declare, said the Eternal One, I will banish from this earth other things. He looked around and he said, one verse, and I'll come back to it, of course. He said, the Eternal One will banish from this place, Jerusalem, the sound of mirth and gladness, the voice of bride and groom. And Harry Martin Jacobi, did he find life hard? Attacked, made use of by his congregation? Surely not. But his life as a rabbi, and other rabbis will know it, the life as a rabbi is never without its difficulties. Doubt, depression, maybe only his children can recall those days. But who would not feel depressed and abandoned by God when his son David was afflicted with a terrible malady? Talented David, dying so young, soon to be followed by Rose, his life's companion. But no, whatever his private feelings, Harry carried on in public with his mission, and seemingly after Rose died, with added vigor. Maybe the time was getting short and they had to solve the world's problems. Jeremiah may have started out by attacking the king, the personal immorality of the people and the state, but gradually it was the very existence of the country that took over. The Babylonians were now masters of the Middle East. Their only rival was Egypt. And it's happened time and again. The real battle was between these empires, north against south, with tiny Judah squeezed in the middle. Misguided kings tried to stand up to whichever empire seemed a threat to them. And thus good King Josiah died in battle at Megiddo fighting Pharaoh Necho. But now the Babylonians were in the ascendancy. Some in Judah urged the king to forge alliances with Egypt, others to get ready to fight Babylon. Others, including Jeremiah, advised King Joachim to seek a truce with the Babylonians, even if it meant becoming their vassals. But the advice went unheard. An attempt was made to defy the Babylonians. Well, this led in 597 to the Babylonians capturing Jerusalem and King Jehoiakim, and the leading nobles were sent in exile to Babylon. Zedekiah was installed as king by the Babylonians, and Jeremiah continued his attempt to pursue peace and accommodation. But Zedekiah tried another rebellion, and Jeremiah opposed it again. His advice was deemed treacherous, and this was another reason Jeremiah found himself again in prison. Friends told him to cease prophesying, and he tried. But as on previous occasions, and I quote, and I always love this from Leobeck College, I remember our German teacher telling us, my bowels arrive in pain. I can hear a voice now. My heart moans within me, says Jeremiah. I cannot hold my peace because I hear the blare of horns, the alarms of war. Nebuchadnezzar's army invaded and captured King Zedekiah, executed his two sons in front of him, and then put his eyes out before carrying him captive into Babylon. This marked the end of the Judean kingdom, the end of the Davidic line, Jerusalem destroyed, the survivors of the destruction taken into exile in Babylon. Jeremiah's prophecy of doom had come to pass. But now the real test of his character came to the fore. Because despite his warnings that now seemed vindicated, he all along tempered his pessimism with belief and hope in the future. Jeremiah, sometime before the destruction, and before he was locked up in prison again, was wandering round the streets of Jerusalem. And he saw a potter at work, moulding wet clay into the shape that he desired. And he saw that when the shape went wrong, the potter clumped together the clay and started them again until he got it right. This taught him that God would do the same. He would not utterly destroy the people, but try again and again and reform them into a righteous nation, create them into the right shape. Another day, now in prison, With the enemy at the gates, word came to him that a relative, Hanamel, probably poverty-stricken, informed Jeremiah that he had the right to redeem his plot of land in Anatot. Sense said it was futile. What's the point in owning fields if soon all would go up in smoke? But Jeremiah redeemed the field and paid the money, had a legal deed made out, stored safely in a jar. He said, thus said the Eternal of hosts, houses and fields and vineyards shall again be purchased in this land. Another sign, another of his dramatic signs, but this time he had hope that there would be a future, the times would change, and peace break out. Is he a pessimist or an optimist? When the first exile happened, he was imprisoned because of his prophecies of the coming disaster. But instead of gloating, I got it right, he sat down and dictated to his secretary Baruch a letter to the exiles in Babylon. You can read the whole letter yourself. It's in chapter 29. I'll quote it verbatim. Jeremiah wrote, "Thus says the God of Israel to the whole community, which I exiled from Jerusalem to Babylon." What did he say? Build houses and dwell in them. Plant gardens and eat their fruit. Take wives and beget sons and daughters, and take wives for your sons and give your daughters to husbands, that they may bear children. Multiply there and do not decrease. And this is interesting with the politicians here. He said way back then, he said, seek the welfare of the city in which you are exiled and pray to God on its behalf, for in its prosperity you shall prosper. And when you pray to me wholeheartedly, I will hear you. And thus says the Eternal One, when Babylon's 70 years are over, I will take note of you, and I will bring you back from all the places I have exiled you and bring you back to this place. And the letter worked, and it worked to this day. The exiles did not give up their identity like the 10 lost tribes. They survived and flourished in exile, and in 70 years, some of them, not the majority, some of them did return to the land. They learned that God was not tied to Jerusalem, but could be worshipped wherever you were so long as you prayed sincerely. Thus it is said, the synagogue was founded. You could say that the modern Zionist dream had its roots in this letter, except that this time it took 2,000 years before the Jewish sovereignty was re-established in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Jeremiah's letter taught Jews that they should become good citizens of the country where they found themselves, if it would let them. Thus was founded the loyal prayer in our standard liturgy that we say every Shabbat for the ruler and the state where we happen to be living at that time. And the people survived in Babylon, and Judaism was founded there, and Judaism, of course, survives to this very day. Of course, the other factor that ensured the survival of the Jewish people was the belief in the future coming of the Messiah. Jeremiah added his contribution to this belief. One day he was proclaiming, no offspring of the line of David will sit on the throne and rule against Judah. But the next chapter we read, a time is coming, declares the Eternal One, when I will raise up a true branch of David's line. He shall reign as king and prosper, and Israel shall dwell secure. And I could quote many other phrases that show us that Jeremiah had hope in the future. Let me just add one. He said in chapter 33, yet again there will be heard in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem the sound of rejoicing and the voice of the gladness, the voice of the bridegroom and the voice of the bride. Kol sason v'kol simcha, kol chatan v'kol kala. To this day, it is the final blessing of the Jewish wedding service. Is that pessimism or is it hope? And Rabbi Jacobi, after the experiences of his youth, losing parents and family, a refugee from pillar to post, a pessimist would hardly have remained religious, losing God and faith in God. But Harry took up the mission to revive Judaism after the Shoah, to replace the lost religious leaders by becoming a tireless leader himself, and inspiring a daughter and son to carry out on his work, and to use his own experience to fight for the rights of modern refugees, motivated to visit refugees camps in Calais, optimistic and working and interested in the fate of the Jewish people, in Israel, in the future of liberal Judaism, and active almost to the very end. Let me end with two personal asides. Harry claimed for a number of years, increasingly, that he was the only person alive who was at the first post-war conference of the World Union for Progressive Judaism, and therefore he had a right to speak at each occasion. But others demanded a place, but Harry never gave up. I recall at one conference in Jerusalem, Harry, as usual, asked to be included, but in the end was only offered hamotzi, the one-line grace before meals. He was privately upset and offended, but accepted and went on to save the day and maybe the conference. For some reason, a right-wing politician had been asked to speak before dinner, and he spoke words that were quite unacceptable to everybody there. It was an insult to almost everybody at the conference. Harry got up and to say hamotzi, but then in 10 to 15 minutes, inspiringly rejected every point the politician had made, and instead proposed the progressive Jewish view on the subject. He was loudly applauded. He saved the day and the evening, and all joined in gusto as he blessed the bread. And another one, which I know other people have shared, the Southgate, and this I dedicate to Southgate in a way. Harry, in his late 80s, it must have been, living alone, invited Sharon and I for dinner, and Sharon said, "Can I bring anything?" But Harry said, "I've got it all sorted." We got there, then nibbles on the table, a drink was offered, and then Harry handed round menus from the local Chinese takeaway. We all ordered exactly what we wanted. Everybody was well satisfied. Many people, half Harry's age, have given up inviting people for dinner. Harry wanted to carry on as he and Rose had always done, hospitable and friendly right to the end, optimistic and looking forward until his very last day. Harry, Jeremiah and Harry Martin Jacobi MBE, faithful servants of the Eternal One to the end of their days. That's what I was here for.
Great. Thank you, Rabbi Goldstein, for those beautiful, moving, and inspiring words. We now have some time for questions. We also have some people on Zoom. Mark, we have people on Zoom? Correct, yeah. So, Andrew, would you prefer questions individually or in We'll start individually.
Maybe there won't be any. So.
So just ask the people on Zoom if you have any questions, just to write them in the chat. And we'll start with some questions in the room, and then perhaps we'll go to the people on Zoom. So just to ask, if you'd be willing, when you if and when you ask a question, you could just say your name first of all, just so we know who you are. Right, who would like to kick off, please?
It's all been said. Yeah.
Well, perhaps I'll kick off with
Yeah,
one.
go on. Yeah.
A little controversial, but it feels important given the topic. I was just wondering, listening to your inspiring words, and given the times, I can't help but ask, in your opinion, if Jeremiah were around today and Rabbi Jacobi were around today in the land of Israel, what would they be saying to the leadership of Israel in the way that Jeremiah spoke to the king in his day?
With whom would Israel, would it be Babylon or would it be Egypt? In those days, you had a choice, one to the other. It's interesting because Jeremiah said the way to go is Babylon. He had the political nous, or he felt he did, to say Babylon's the future and they're going to win this world war, as it were. And Babylon was successful. The saddest thing about Jeremiah's life is that at the end, the Babylonians invaded. Jeremiah was taken as a traitor to Egypt and ended his life in Egypt. And life could not have been... do you know what's the right answer? Would he have known? Would he have known which way to go? Unfortunately, I think the present time is not just this or that, north or south. There's so much pressure. I have a feeling that, before even sort of the current war started, he would have had lots to say about the poverty within Israel. He would have had lots to say about the direction maybe it was taking. I suppose I can say it here, I'm sure he would have a lot to say about the right-wing turn and ultra-belief of a certain of the part of the society, which he would claim is perverting the future and the society for all of the country.
Right.
So I think he would have been outspoken there. Right. In terms of his advice on the military situation, well, who knows what the advice would be.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. James.
Thank you for a very lovely talk. It was wonderful to hear Harry Jacobi evoked alongside Jeremiah the prophet. A very special combination. I don't know if others here can comment, most notably, obviously, Richard and Margaret, but Harry Jacobi was always incredibly nice to me. I'm going to put it that way. I am not in any way a distinguished representative of our profession. I am probably the nobody and the non-entity of rabbinic profession. But Harry Jacobi was always gracious and charming. I'm not saying he gave me a message of optimism or hope. He maintained certain forms of courtesy, and he extended them equally to everybody. So even I, as his colleague, would see this charm and interest and concern and friendliness, and I'll never forget it. It's different from, as I said, hope and optimism. It's actually a formal thing, and my question relates to that. Just once, I think, present something at the Liberal Kala, the meeting of the Liberal, many years ago, about prophecy. And I asked my colleagues, tell us each who is your favorite prophet. And our colleague, Rabbi Norman Zalad, I'll never forget it, said, well, I like Jeremiah, the sad sack of the prophets. I have not heard the expression sad sack in many years, and you didn't use it today. But actually, I thought it was a bit accurate because one of the distinctive things about Jeremiah is that his voice is sad. I don't think it's depressed or hypercritical or actually gives us political insight in many ways, but sometimes we have to be sad. Our voice has to be sad. And I think we often find that quite difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
When we hear people express sadness. Anyway, I'd like you to comment on two things, if you may, if I may ask you questions. One is that sadness, communicating in a sad voice. And secondly, do you think that Jeremiah recommended or advised abandoning the sacrificial system? Did he say it was all meaningless? Or did he just say that it was being carried out in a meaningless way?
Yeah.
I'm curious what
Let me just repeat the question for the people on Zoom. Thank you for your words, Rabbi James. The question, two-part question. First, ask Rabbi Goldstein to reflect on the sadness of the voice of Jeremiah speaking through the book. And the second is, was Jeremiah in any way calling for the end of the sacrificial system? I think I've asked, that's the question. Okay.
Sad, yes, I'm sure he was. I'm sure if you saw him in the street, or well, probably in those days, if you saw him coming down the street, you knew you're in for a broch, you're in for a telling off or something like that, because that was his ongoing thing. Let's be realistic in terms. But well, every time I hear Kol Sasson v'Kol Simcha, the voice of the bride, and the wedding service, they don't come to me as words of sadness, and maybe there are many other. Of course, one of the things that differentiated him from Rabbi Jacobi was that Jeremiah somewhere says that he was told not to get married. And I admit, when I read that, I thought, maybe you wouldn't. Can you imagine what it would be like to marry Jeremiah? Whereas Harry had the great blessing, and I'm sure that I very often kept him on the straight and narrow, as rabbis' wives sometimes do. But anyway, Jeremiah, certainly there is a great sadness there. It must be, because when people are mocking you and when you feel you've got this burning message to get over, and that's the whole thing, chapter after chapter, this message of the need for social justice and political savvy, and people laugh at you. Because, as I said, he initially was living in sort of fairly good times. And when you're living in reasonably prosperous times, you don't want a prophet coming to say it's all going to come to an end. And therefore, it must have been a burden to him. So, yes, he was sad. And what was the other one? Sacrificial. Well, I think if you look at it, he's not the only one to use this sort of formula that what God wants is the way you live your life, both as an individual and as a society, that God wanted. And I think most of us would say this was one of the first times in human history that this, people, religions, was nothing to do with social justice for him. It was at the heart of his social justice. Whether he went to shul or synagogue, I don't know which wasn't invented, but in other words, did he go to the temple? We don't know. I can think of no reason why he would have been totally against the ritual. He makes it quite clear it was the ritual that you carry on. You go to synagogue or you go to church or wherever it is on the Sabbath, Meanwhile, you're doing all the things in your life which are reprehensible. And the synagogue or church or whatever doesn't make up for what you do in your life. The prayers don't make any difference. They're an affront to God.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. I really enjoyed the talk. I'm Ed Turner. I'm a Christian priest with a Jewish heritage.
Oh, no.
I don't know if this is a question as much as a thought. Sorry, question as much as a thought, but Christians are endlessly sort of obsessed with personal faith. Jeremiah he gives us a incredible insight into his personal journey and his personal faith, and yet he is speaking to community and a corporate identity. So I suppose my question is really, which, if either, is more important in our relationship with God? Is it the personal or is it the corporate?
Well, as you said, I quoted perhaps 3 occasions when he encounters God, but it's constant. I mean, God is very much with him. And after he's first been persuaded, yes, God does want him to do this. There's no doubt about it. All along, God is there. But he wants to bring to people. He wants to bring God to people through not the temple way. I mean, that was there, but he saw God's desire for the whole nation to be righteous. And therefore he wanted that. To look after the poor, to do all the things that he learned from the Torah about that we have this obligation to the poor and to the weak and to the widow. That must have been burning in his. I mean, I said my bowels. He said the word of God is in my bowels. And as students, we thought this was ridiculous. You can't talk about God's word being in your bowels, but we knew what it meant, and it was there. He was this just burning desire. For himself, but also for society, and that's maybe I haven't understood correctly.
Can I follow it up? So, I suppose a follow-up question is for the Hebrews that were taken into exile. They weren't all bad people, and some of them were following Torah as they should have been.
Sure, absolutely.
So, I suppose a simple question is, why do these bad things happen to individuals that are doing good?
Well, I think that's such a big religious question. I'm not sure that we can answer it at the moment. All we can say is that they heard the words of his letter and they kept faith. Enough of them kept faith to continue to believe, and actually not just to believe in God and in the religion that they had memories of, but to take it, progressive Judaism as it were, to take it beyond the temple, beyond the sacrifices, to begin to create what we now know is a way of servicing. And he said you can pray to God basically wherever you are, in a foreign land as well as in here. And that surely he's not talking to the rotters among the people, he's talking to the good people. Maybe he converted some of the rotters into realizing their error and becoming more righteous people. But in the end, we can't say. There must have been many of the people there. It wouldn't have worked if the people there didn't take from his message and the message of other people the faith that there was a future, and that we could live a life here. And he had instructions for that. So I think we can't say which of the people who heard the words and those who didn't, but maybe then repented. I don't know.
And of course, we have a whole other book of the Bible that deals with your question of theodicy. Why do good things happen to bad? Bad things happen to good people. The book of Job, maybe that's the 7th memorial lecture. But I am just wondering, obviously, Rabbi Jacobi himself lived through the Holocaust, the Shoah, and lost family and friends, and how wondering, how he personally dealt with that question. you know.
You have to ask the family. And probably didn't talk to you. I don't know. I never heard him. I mean, yes, when it came to Holocaust Memorial Day eventually and other things, he wanted to be part of it. But I do remember one of his great fights was not necessarily that, but to make sure that he was present at the cenotaph for the Remembrance Sunday. He fought to be there with the other rabbis because he was the only one who'd actually been in the army and all that, and he deserved the thing. And he was a loyal Briton in terms of that. In terms of, I never heard him talk, or maybe you can, Margaret, you can.
We've got the mic there, Margaret.
I mean, I don't really have an answer, but coming in today, we were looking at the list of presidents and treasurers and secretaries and so on, and I saw the name Max Sheldon. Do people remember Max Sheldon? His daughter you knew, right, Valerie, who had multiple sclerosis. And I do remember Dad talking once at a Kala about that and how that challenged his faith. And I remember at our home, the long conversations he'd had with Max Sheldon about it. And Dad tried to keep faith, but I think that was a real challenge for him. And I mention it because I just saw Max's name there on the board there. But I think his response was to live his life as you've described, and I guess it's a good opportunity for me to say thank you on behalf of Richard and me, really, for such a beautiful tribute that I know we were both really deeply moved by. And his response was to live the life he did.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have time for one last question before we hand over to Mark to give the vote of thanks.
No. Good.
No, okay. And maybe just check if there's one last question on Zoom. Yes. Well, if we just hand the microphone to you, that would be great. Thanks. Mark, this gentleman here.
Thank you very much. My name is Harold Rosenberg. Just wondered, we sort of get the impression that Rabbinic Judaism was the main kind of foundation for what has happened over the last couple of thousand years. How did Rabbinic Judaism treat the prophetic messages, the Jeremiahs and so forth? Did they go through Rabbinic Judaism more or less with their message intact, or what did Rabbinic Judaism do to the prophets?
My view on that is that, of course, when we talk about Rabbinic Judaism, people think in terms of the laws, about the sort of how we do things, how we act, and all the rest of it, and all the rituals and so on. But of course, parallel to that is the Midrash, the homiletic interpretation of it, and therefore the books after books in terms of developing the message about acting righteously in our everyday life, as well as how we observe the rituals that they develop the rituals. And therefore that is, but there's also parallel to that is all of the sermonic stuff, which we call midrash and so on, that also has to do with how we live our life. And I think that would be my answer. So within the rabbinic literature, you have both the attitudes, and of course they were increasingly saying that we have to lead a religious life in terms of rituals, but also, well, very much so. And at different times, different messages come to the fore, but it's all there in rabbinic literature.
Yeah, but just to say, there were very much a sense in the earliest days, and very much now in progressive Judaism, that the echoes of the prophetic voices had sometimes been submerged or had not been foregrounded as much, and it's very much a driving aspect of progressive Judaism today, to reclaim, to bring back, to put on a pedestal, you know, the values, the ethics and the morality that the prophets of all those thousands of years ago spoke out. Speaking truth to power is something that is critical today. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Hand over to the chair of our community to have the final word, obviously.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. Not much I can say really, but in a world which appears currently in a state of turmoil, we certainly need to find hope for the future. And if Jeremiah can find hope, and if Harry Jacobi can find hope, then surely we all can find hope.
Thank you.
So can I thank you for your erudite and thoughtful talk today.
Yeah.
We appreciate it very much. Can I thank also the organising committee who organised the lectures, which is Sue Jessel and Phyllis Friedman and Richard and Margaret Jacobi, and all those who have helped our tea, which you're about to have, and our security for looking after us. And just to let you know that in a year's time, on the 26th of April 26, our 7th lecture will be given by Rabbi Ofek Meyer, who is the Managing Director and Headmaster of the Leo Beck Education Center in Haifa. And the Leo Beck Education Center is the only progressive school and synagogue.
Not synagogue. Yeah.
Well, school, a pluralistic school in Israel, and is a beacon for progressive Judaism there. May I just say thank you all for coming. Tea is served in the Schindler Hall behind us here. The way there is out the front door. Turn right again, walk all the way to the back, and you'll find the Schindler Hall. So thank you very much, everybody.